Learning outcomes. After reading this module, you shall be able to gain an insight about economics of education. Understand various aspects of economics related to education. Identify the returns to education. Incorporate the basic macroeconomic theories and models for educational policy analysis. Education economics or economics of education is the study of economic issues relating to education, including the demand for education and the financing and provision of education. From early works on the relationship between schooling and labor market outcomes for the individuals, the field of the economics of education has grown rapidly to cover virtually all areas with linkages to education. Let us have a review of educational principles. Here is a list which represents the basic principles that underlie effective learning. These principles are distilled from research from a variety of disciplines. The first one is students' prior knowledge can help or hinder learning. Students come into our courses with knowledge, beliefs and attitudes gained in other courses and through daily life. As students bring this knowledge to bear in our classrooms, it influences how they filter and interpret what they are learning. If students' prior knowledge is robust and accurate and activated at the appropriate time, it provides a strong foundation for building new knowledge. However, when knowledge is inert, insufficient for the task, activated inappropriately or inaccurate, it can interfere with or impede new learning. The second is how students organize knowledge, influence how they learn and apply what they know. Students naturally make connections between pieces of knowledge. When these connections form knowledge structures that are accurately and meaningfully organized, students are better able to retrieve and apply their knowledge effectively and efficiently. In contrast, when knowledge is connected in accurate or random ways, students can fail to retrieve or apply it appropriately. The third is students' motivation determines, directs and sustains what they do to learn. As students enter college and gain greater autonomy over what, when and how they study and learn, motivation plays a critical role in guiding the direction, intensity, persistence and quality of learning behaviors in which they engage. When students find positive value in a learning goal or actively expect to successfully achieve a desired learning outcome and perceive support from their environment, they are likely to be strongly motivated to learn. To develop mastery, students must acquire component skills, practice integrated them and know when to apply and what they have learned. Students must develop not only the component skills and knowledge necessary to perform complex tasks, they must also practice combining and integrating them to develop greater fluency and automaticity. Finally, students must learn when and how to apply the skills and knowledge they learn. As instructors, it is important that we develop conscious awareness of these elements of mastery so as to help our students learn more effectively. Goal-directed practice coupled with targeted feedback enhances the students' quality of learning. Learning and performance are best fostered when students engage in practice that focuses on a specific goal or criteria, targets an appropriate level of challenge and is of sufficient quantity and frequency to meet the performance criteria. Practice must be coupled with feedback that explicitly communicates about some aspects of students' performance relative to specific target criteria, provides information to help students progress in meeting these criteria, and is given at a time and frequency that allows it to be useful. Students' current level of development interacts with the social, emotional and intellectual climate of the course to impact learning. Students are not only intellectual but also social and emotional beings, and they are still developing the full range of intellectual, social and emotional skills. While we cannot control the developmental process, we can shape the intellectual, social, emotional and physical aspects of classroom climate in developmentally appropriate ways. In fact, many studies have shown that the climate we create has implications for our students. A negative climate may impede learning and performance, but a positive climate can energize students' learning. To become self-directed learners, students must learn to monitor and adjust their approaches to learning. Learners may engage in a variety of metacognitive processes to monitor and control their learning, assessing the task at hand, evaluating their own strengths and weaknesses, planning their approach, applying and monitoring various strategies, and reflecting on the degree to which their current approach is working. Unfortunately, students tend not to engage in these processes naturally. When students develop the skills to engage these processes, they gain intellectual habits that not only improve their performance but also their effectiveness as learners. The private and social returns to education. The private rate of return reflects the direct cost of schooling to individuals, that is, their out-of-pocket cost. The social rate of return reflects the full cost to society of schooling, including any public subsidies. The private rate of return should be based on after-tax income, whereas the social rate of return should be based on a pre-tax income, but this is not always done. The array of higher education benefits. Economic benefits of higher education in public domain. These can be increased tax revenues, greater productivity, increased consumption, increased workforce flexibility, decreased reliance on government financial support. The social benefits of higher education in public domain. These can be the reduced crime rates, increased charitable giving community service, increased quality of civic life, social cohesion, appreciation of diversity, improved ability to adapt to and use technology. Then there are certain economic benefits of higher education in private space. These can be higher salaries and benefits, employment, higher savings levels, improved working conditions, personal and professional mobility. Then we can talk about social benefits of higher education in private space. These can be improved health and life expectancy, improved quality of life for offspring, better consumer decision making, increased personal status, more hobbies and leisure activities. Private returns are higher than the social returns, where the latter is defined on the basis of private benefits but total private plus external costs. This is because of the public subsidization of education and the fact that typical social rate of return estimates are not able to include social benefits. Nevertheless, the degree of public subsidization increases with the level of education, which has regressive income distribution implications. There is a concern in the literature with what might be called social rate of return that includes the social benefits or externalities. If one could include externalities, then social rates of return may well be higher than private rates of return to education. Returns to education, the human capital theory. According to Pashrafals et al., the human capital theory or HTC has roots in the works of classical authors such as Adam Smith and Alfred Marshall. The former concluded that a man educated at the expense of much labor and time may be compared to one of those expensive machines, and the work he learns to perform should replace to him the whole expense of his education. The latter referred to industrial training as a national investment. Much later, authors such as Mincer, Schulz and Becker gave meat to this theory when they affirmed that time and money spent on education builds human capital. Hence, one should be able to estimate the rate of return or ROR on such investment in a way similar to investment in physical capital. In short, the HTC states that a person's education is an investment which involves cost in terms of direct spending on education and the opportunity cost of student time in her or his human capital, which is akin to investment by a firm in physical capital, which makes the individual more productive and accrue him or her a future stream of benefits with superior productivity, higher wages and other non-monetary benefits to the individual and the society. The significance of education and human capital has been brought out in many studies and arguments of economic growth and development. This can be classified into the micro and macro levels. Micro level. At the micro level, the theory postulates that an individual bears the cost, that is direct cost, such as fees paid, and indirect costs such as opportunity cost on student time of education, because he or she expect that this investment will create a future stream of benefits to him or her with higher productivity and thus higher wages. Also, according to the theory, other benefits of education may be realized in terms of greater productivity and less need to incur cost. An example of educational benefit that improves production possibilities is the greater labor market productivity of those with additional schooling, and the lesser dependency on subsidies in educated communities is an example of benefit that reduces cost for taxpayers. In addition, a large body of literature in macroeconomics has underscored that productivity spillovers are important determinants of economic growth and that an increase in aggregate human capital will have an effect on aggregate productivity, which is as a result of an increase in an individual's education on productivity. The human capital theory also recognizes the non-monetary benefits that accrue to the individuals as a result of the investment in education. Villa 2000 encapsulates in these words: the economic benefits that education bestows are not limited to higher expected production or lower production cost. They could also consist in direct additions to welfare possibilities in terms of longer life expectancy, less criminal behavior, stronger social cohesion, or greater political participation. Being educated empowers people to advance their interests and resist exploitation. Educated people are more aware of how to avoid health risks to live longer, have smaller families, exhibit better consumption saving habits and more comfortable lives. Theory predicts that increases in the overall level of education can benefit society in ways that are not fully reflected in the private returns of educated workers, what is otherwise referred to as the externalities of education. For instance, social groups, communities or countries where the average schooling is higher offer as a rule better living conditions, both material and non-material, than those where the population is less educated. Macro level. At the macro level, Robert 1991 developed a human capital model which shows that education and the creation of human capital is responsible for both the differences in labor productivity and the differences in overall levels of technology that we observe in the world today. This, according to him, explains the spectacular growth in East Asia that has given education and human capital their current popularity in the field of economic growth and development. Countries such as Hong Kong, Korea, Singapore and Taiwan have achieved unprecedented rates of economic growth while making large investments in education. This correlation between education, national and international development can be traced to the solo growth model way back in mid-1950s. This theoretical model asserts that the economic growth of a country depends on its endowments of labor, population size and of physical capital, that is machinery, infrastructure and on technological change. Now we can discuss about educational production functions. An education production function is an application of the economic concept of a production function to the field of education. It relates various inputs affecting a student's learning from schools, families, peers, neighborhoods, etc. to measured outputs including subsequent labor market success, college attendance, graduation rates and most frequently standardized test scores. The original study that eventually prompted interest in the idea of education production functions was by a sociologist, James S. Coleman. The Coleman report, published in 1966, concluded that the marginal effect of various school inputs on students' achievement was small compared to the impact of families and friends. Later work by Eric A. Hanushk, Richard Monaine and other economists introduced the structure of production to the consideration of student learning outcomes. An educational production function is the relationship between school and student inputs and the measure of school output. The method of representing the educational production process is likely to be of particular value both in descriptive studies of human capital formation and in normative investigations to determine optimal educational resource allocation. If schooling does have a unique effect on labor productivity or earnings, we should be able to trace this effect to the development of cognitive skills and attitudes in school. We may also be able to relate the development of productive skills and attitudes to school policies concerning the allocation of scarce resources. A production function relating school inputs to development of productive capacity should give us a better indication of why the more educated are better qualified for productive roles. Moreover, differences in production functions for different racial and social class groups as well as differences in educational inputs for these groups may help explain an important aspect of determination of the distribution of personal earnings. In setting school policy and in long-range educational planning, knowledge of the educational production function is essential to efficient resource allocation. This is true whether the decision unit is pursuing the objective of growth or of equality, or a combination of these and others, perhaps some non-economic goals. Without an estimate of the technology of education, that is the production function, the relationship between the opportunity cost and expected benefits of particular policies must be little more than a guesswork. Let us summarize what we have learned from this module. There is no doubt that education seems to be one of the most important policy determinants that evidently affect the economy and its functioning. In this module, we have learned the relevance of economics in the field of education and other several dimensions associated with it. In this process, we started with the understanding of theoretical educational principles and then moved on to learn various returns to education, that is private and social, which can be well conceptualized in the form of human capital theory and its implications. This theory comes as one of the relevant theory to understand the returns to education, where education is considered as investment in human capital and should understand the rate of return on such an investment. And further, the idea of educational production functions helped us to give the structure to relate the outcomes of education with the various inputs of education. That's all with this module. Thank you.